this reunion experience made you want to record another album together?
Interesting question.
Who's going to answer that question?
It made me look forward to the idea of rocking more shows. Like the juices all flowed back, and it felt like, it just felt like nothing changed. And so, but the reunion hasn't made me want to record a new album. Seeing those dudes on stage last night, all the young bucks, made me like, yo, we can still get in this. So that put a little fire in me.
I think I've had just that since we've been kicking in and talking about this kind of stuff and maybe even tour stuff. I've kind of always had the opinion that I thought it would be a good thing or interesting challenge. Again, not sure if it will work, but something I'd be excited about trying.
I'm interested to see if there's actually going to be a need. Because I think there's going to be a need based on the regrouping. Fanatic was sending me some info about Big Daddy Kane, how he refuses to do new music, new style music. He never said that he won't record new music, but he uses his old stuff as his means of navigating and staying in hip hop and doing stuff. But I think there may be a need at some point just because of the regrouping. Because look at everything we spoke about up to this point. What do you do now? How do you speak into the culture? Even though God has so many different things that we've already said that are coming true here 20 years later, still speaking into the culture currently. How do you do that without an updated material other than just spills and reach as many as you really want to reach?
Oh yeah, it's gonna come up. I mean, anytime we get together and start reminiscing, you can't reminisce without trying to look forward. So it comes up, but we're 6 people. How many people are we? We're a lot of people. So you're gonna have different, ideas and just, there's hurdles, there's hopes, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a natural conversation.
And where we've landed is on stuff like, we feel like we could tour, we feel like we could do stuff like this, a reunion event. But as far as the album, it's a bit of a monster, so we haven't finished talking about it.
And even from a selfish perspective, I mean, even the process of recording an album is, for me personally, it has been enriching, sanctifying, just listening to everybody's songs and where those songs come from. It's just been enriching.
Leading up to this conference, JR, who obviously you mentored, told me that your example of allowing the authority of Scripture to dictate your art is still the blueprint for him today. So I was just wondering, what does it look like when you're creating the art for the Scripture to dictate it?
I don't think it looks much different than what the Christian life looks like. You know what I mean? In your decision-making process, you have a grid through which you see the world. And if your art is a reflection of your heart, you have a grid that informs you about what's a good ideal, what's good to desire, what's good to how you want to handle this, this situation. I don't care if you say I'm just an artist, and you're talking about what happened when you went through the drive-thru at McDonald's. If you're a Christian in that drive-thru, you got a grid that tells you how to respond to that nasty, attendant at the drive-thru window. So I don't think it's really that deep of a process. It's the Christian life translated to music. At least it should be.
I think also what takes place is when we're just discussing, whatever we're discussing, the scriptures flows out as naturally as any reference point would, because, if you listen to hip-hoppers, they'll go in and out of, because, the streets, yeah, because Biggie, because my man around the way, like, that was something outside of themselves comes up as part of their process of thinking and evaluating and appraising. And for us, we're usually not speaking primarily about things that don't emerge from a scriptural reference point when we're trying to work through, like he said, what's best. At the core, what are we doing? And how do we want to do it? Do we have any parameters around us, there was a time where, you think, man, let's rock jewelry, or, let's rock a certain kind of outfit, or let's But then, the scriptures has you thinking about, now to what degree is that going to be an impediment to some other aspect of what the Bible is trying to get at? Oh, swag needs to be turned down here because swag is inherently problematic. You only get that in the scriptures. You don't get that from the culture. The culture says the more swag, the merrier. The scriptures would sort of caution you about whether or not your swag can get in the way of His glory. So it's that's what, that's the kind of thing. Letting the scripture interrupt your regularly scheduled program, so that whatever you would, the inclinations that would just come because you're in step with, whether it be your flesh or you're in step with the streets or you're in step with the culture, has another filter through which it has to go through, and that actually overrides some of the other cravings that may seem to surface during that process.
I think as artists, the thing that I think people are wrestling with trying to be artists is, especially as a Christian, if you're an artist, you hate if you feel like people can predict what you're going to say already. So the fact that you're a Christian, you feel like I'm hedged in, like Dude said, we have parameters. But you want to be unpredictable. Art that's predictable isn't really there should be something surprising about it. So the Christian kind of feels like, dag, if they already know where I'm coming from, how can I be unpredictable? And they fear, my art's going to be looked at as corny if they know what I'm going to say before I open my mouth already. But I think one of the things that we wrestle with as Christians in the arts is, I don't think the what we say needs to be unpredictable. I think the how we say it can be unpredictable. So there's two different ways you can approach your art. Is your what unpredictable and your how predictable? Or is it the reverse? Now, you probably know what my end game is going to be if you know the scriptures. But maybe you don't know how I'm going to get there. That's where the surprise comes from. So our what is governed by the scripture. Our how, there's a million ways that we get there. That's where the creative arts comes from.
Now, something you alluded to, swag in hip-hop, you getting more glory, therefore God not getting as much. I feel like that's not a conversation that I've heard in Christian hip-hop ever, besides talking to you guys. Now, in this culture that is all about you looking bigger, how do you approach art in that kind of environment?
The Bible is a human document as well as a divine one. The forms known as the Bible is not new to God's people. The forms in the Bible, wisdom literature, historical literature, narrative literature, epistolary literature, even, we'll get to Gospels. Those are all forms that other people who didn't know God use those exact same forms. The Gospel genre, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, is a hybrid of various ones, but it's viewed as an original, where they took biography, they took historiography, and they took some of these things, but they submitted them to their own agenda. But it forced them off the straight, biography, historiography, forced them off that into this new genre we know as gospel. It's slightly different, though there are many similarities. Why did they change it? Because the forms that already existed had things that could not support what they intended to do. Why did they use them at all? Because they were close enough to being able to relate to the times. But I'm not going to just subject what I'm doing, my agenda, to the forms of the time. I'm going to subject the forms of the time to my agenda. So I say all of that to say, if you look at them, you see where they departed from other people. And that's what we're saying about hip-hop. That hip-hop, there are things in it that force you to depart with it. That doesn't mean everything. Some people will say, don't even mess with it because. We say, no, let's mess with it. But where we must depart with it, let's not be afraid to depart with it. Glory is one of those. Everyone has already said that. Who wouldn't want to be posted up in a video with a knot, right? Hopping out of a expensive car, counting their money while they're giving the gospel, so as to imply, look what the gospel gave me, or look what the gospel did for me. But you may say, there's also another message that I don't want to send through that. Let's not do that. You see what I'm saying? So glory is one of those. I'm something. John the Baptist said he must increase, I must decrease. So now what do when rap increases you? You see what I'm saying? You must find ways. But what? This is the last thing I'm going to say. Peter refused to be crucified right side up. Why? Good enough to just be crucified for Jesus, right? He was so struck with the gap between him and his Savior that he said, I'm not worthy to die in the same way. Can I find a way to diminish me even more so that the relationship between he and I is understood, at least from my vantage point, upside down? So you must make the conscious choice. How do I get across my commitment to these principles? And hip hop actually welcomes the person who's not ashamed to what you gonna say? What you gonna do? You ain't afraid to look soft when softness is anti-hip hop? You know what I mean? This is the last thing I said. I said that was the last thing. When Kanye West came out with polo shirts and Louis bags, and he was like, I know this is basically not state property, who came out with Carhartt and Tim's, but he wasn't afraid to go in the opposite direction. It actually became one of the things that endeared people to him. When he took the I'm little brother, I got a big brother, when he was going against 50 Cent, and he wasn't afraid to go countercultural, it actually allowed him to outsell 50 Cent at the time, though 50 probably was tilting down anyway. But I say all that to say, you can't be afraid. And you don't just have these human elements involved. You have a God who's also involved to sustain you when you go off script from hip hop, because you honor him rather than hip hop.
You know, man, it's a big deal. Glory, words like glory, I think are sometimes so sensationalized that the believer becomes afraid to use that. But at the same time, as believers, we have to find a way, even as glory is given to us for artistic bents and things that we do, not to belittle God in the process. Because when you do, what ends up happening is you end up taking all of that for yourself. When you become the position, reflection of the glory, God then becomes less than you. And that's why it's so difficult in our human nature to take out the swag, to get rid of. But that is the thing you have to do in order for it to work.
What do you think about how Christians are doing hip hop now? What is your opinion on the state of Christian hip hop?
I think there's a bigger question. Sometimes I think we start by assuming we even understand what we're talking about. You know what I mean? Yeah. I did an article for the Christian Research Journal. I went around and I just, having relationships in the industry with certain gatekeepers, certain artists, certain dudes who kind of are pioneers and started stuff. And to a man, nobody could tell me what Christian hip hop really was. Like, they couldn't even describe it. I said, what is it? Everybody had a different answer. There wasn't a unifying answer for even what Christian hip hop even is. I just say all of that to say, so when we start even asking the question that you just asked, like, and what was it again? Restate it.
What is your opinion on the state of Christian
hip hop?
State of,
right. You start with like, man, what even is it today? What's the expectation for what it should be, what it should look like? I think it's morphed into all these different things, and so it depends on who you ask that question. What is it? For me, I think I'm starting to try to get beyond that question, even though I don't mind going back and answering certain things. I'm trying to concentrate on, staying in this tradition of somewhat what I think it is, kind of taking the abundance of our heart, especially those of us who not only say we're Christians, but also the question is like, what's the mission? Like, what is the mission? Like, why are you using them? If it's just art, in my opinion, I don't think it necessarily has to be, just like we don't need the tag, like I don't have to be a Christian or I'm just an artist who happens to be. I don't know that you need the CHH tag to just do art. I think there's art out there and people just have the freedom to go do it and do that well. But I think if you are taking this tag, if you're asking me a question about Christian hip hop, and if the end goal is to affect people either with the gospel or do cultural engagement, theological engagement, I think there's some parameters and some prescription that come with it. I think the scriptures, give us some parameters and some prescription for proclaiming, for exalting, and then we just talked about the glory question a little bit. And so, I don't know. I think for me, when I look around, it seems like some of the definitions may be changing a little bit about what we do and how we do that.
So by analogy, in talking about the state of Christian hip hop, on one hand, who would not rejoice that there seems to be an increase in financial benefit, notoriety, enthusiasm,
Quality of music.
Diversity of sounds and approaches. So that's a plus. I even would say there has been that's good for it, partnerships with other entities. So there's been a partnership that Christians who use hip hop partner with other entities. I mean, from compassion to desiring God to, all right. That's for the plus. Where the lament will come in is, so I want to use an analogy. It's been said that the health of America is hinged economically on the strength of the middle class. That's not to discount the lower class, and that's not to discount the upper class. But everyone says, and I've heard both sides, partisan affirmation, that the strength of America, the health of America is built, necessitates a strong middle class, right? I would say that hip hop health, Christian hip hop's health, we still don't understand what that means, but assuming we know what we're talking about, is hinged on there being a strong, robust Christian hip hopness. That is not hip hop of a person who happens to be Christian. Yet that group, I think, has the potential to be the upper crust in terms of sales, likability. I think they can be that. And I think that as long as you have that tier, people will be excited because that generates the kind of revenue, that generates the kind of excitement, mass appeal. But when people think Christian hip hop, they think Christian. And I think the Christianness of artists who happen to be Christians always goes down. Like that's almost, but to a T. If you were to take a survey, who calls themselves, who boasts in your Christian hip hopness? The top level cats do not use the term. They will not use the term. They not only don't use the term, they say, I don't like the term. Christian hip hop is those who even deem themselves to be that, then we hardly have anybody who does work. Everybody keeps running to Shyland and Flame and like who's that's what you call yourself. Understanding what it is, again, because I think most of us would say that the label is really inconsequential, outside of the fact that we use the label just because it itself is a declaration of our intention to be less peripheral with Christ and more central with Him, only because there is a need for that. There's always a need for Christ to dominate what He touches, not just be there somewhere, to dominate what He touches. Everything He touches, He dominates. So hip-hop should be no exception. There should always be a contingent that does it and that does it well, and that has favor in both directions. But what we've found is those people use it. There's a war. There's a divide between people who have Him dominant and central with people who think that's actually a bad idea. And so when you talk about the state of Christian hip hop, the one thing I lament is there seems to be a division between those who we want to be named as Christian hip hoppers when rightly understood, and we want Christ dominant and central, with those who think that's actually a bad idea, to the point where sometimes it's bad for your brand. It's because you don't want people to think you're that, because actually after all that's bad, after all that's whack. After all, that's corny. It can be good, but it's whack. It can't be good because it's that. Christ is too up there. It's too predictable. You guys are going to talk about stuff that he cares about? What? Like what? You know, this is the last thing I'm going to say. This is the last thing. Snip all you want. Just
That's
don't
the name
snip
of
me
this
and say.
interview. It's the last thing I'm going to say.
Listen.
Last interview.
Paul said, when I came to Corinth, I claimed to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. Do any gospel-centered search you want. Everyone will tell you that the cross, which assumes the resurrection, is the centerpiece of the gospel. Is the gospel also loving your neighbor as yourself? It flows out of the gospel. People say that's not the gospel though. So be nice to your neighbor is not the gospel, right? They say, yo, it's feeding the hungry, but yeah, it flows out of the gospel. You're absolutely right. It's not the gospel though. 1 Corinthians 15 says, the thing I'm going to put before you is that the gospel is Christ died for sinners, was buried, rose. It's a centerpiece issue. So Christ as centerpiece needs to continue to be understood as a good thing. Not the only thing, which is what they sort of kicking back against. We don't want it to be the only thing. And we would agree it shouldn't be the only thing. But that place of it central must continue to be a healthy, thriving, and there should be good relationships there. And if we could have anything, it would be to restore the continuity between people who do the more peripheral Christ or the like no Christ at all, but just not contradicting Christ, and those who keep him central. If that can look like a family, both by the people who do it and Sway in the morning in the Breakfast Club would know that. They would be like, oh, so y'all family though, right? Yeah, that's my family. Yo, some of us, we bring it this way. Some of us bring it that way. That's not what you get. It's almost like, I don't know them. We don't. Oh, y'all thought we were that? Nah, we not that. We this. We about to close that thing. You get me hyped.
Now, you're describing Christians who rap, rappers who Christian. You're talking about people who are all about the art. However, I think that all of those artists would call themselves missionaries to hip-hop.
Right.
Even though they do totally different things.
I have a problem with that.
So what is your problem, and how should be the missionary approach to hip-hop culture?
Put it this way. What's not a missionary then?
Exactly.
So I just want to know and that's a true question. Because I don't mind you being a missionary too. Somebody saying I'm a missionary. Then who's not though? What Christian is not a missionary? No, that's almost like that's how I'm answering this question. Because I don't understand that, right? I don't understand that. Most of us understood missionaries to be very consecrated to a specific, like to bringing Jesus to people. Like the only thing that hindered them from getting to Jesus was some illegality. I go to a country and it's illegal. So I have to position myself to be able to get Jesus in because it's illegal. Who goes anywhere where it's illegal and does not tie what they're doing, the good deed, with the gospel word? So who does not go there and tell them, hi, I'm here with such and such, and my desire is that you may. But the people who say they're missionaries to hip-hop culture often, A, don't bring it up. B, they'll say, again, they don't announce themselves as that. I watch interviews where people just like, I mean, yo, man, you know, I'm a man of faith. I mean, you're going to get what's in me. You know, if I'm talking about Jesus, you're going to get Jesus. If I'm talking about my wife, you can get my wife. If I'm talking about the block, you're going to get the block. They run it like they're just speaking as individuals who got many settings. But then if somebody says, so you're a missionary, sort of. Yeah, I'm a missionary. So I'm like, wait, what makes you a missionary then? And if we could understand that, it would help me understand what we mean when we say, because you both can't be missionaries if what you all do are opposite. I take Jesus to people. I don't. But if they ask me, don't worry, I will. How are you both missionaries? That's my question.
Just the idea, you know, of being missional with the arts, it's tricky because as Wells talked about, you got to ask what rules am I playing by, and then what rules win out when the rules conflict. If there are rules of what it means to be an unashamed, unapologetic gospel representative, just in life in general, and then there are rules of what it takes to succeed and be credible as an artist. Those rules, you can live by both of those, but when they conflict, you got to ask yourself, which am I going to play by? And so, one of the issues I have with the idea of what Deuce is talking about in terms of somebody claiming to be missional, and then you look at their strategy and you can't see how that's missional. One of the reasons why you can't see how that's missional is because it leaves it open to interpretation. It leaves it open to the interpretation of, like you said, well then who's not a missionary if that's what you're going to do? So we had a concert here last night, and a young artist came up, did a song. The song was banging. It was about victory. People were singing. Everybody, the crowd was singing victory. I said, this is a banging song. But then I started thinking, in this context, we interpret victory a certain way. Mm-hmm. We understand what this victory is. As Christians, we can sing it.
Context.
But if this song goes out to the world under the context of just art, and it's about victory, but it's open to interpretation in terms of, it's not a Christian song, it's not a Christian art, it's just a Christian doing a song about victory. But your personal victory could be whatever victory is for you. It could be the time you beat up the bully who was messing with you. It could be the time that you aced, the SATs. It could be the time you got your girlfriend to, have a threesome. Like, people's ideas of personal victories are very different. Yeah. If your art doesn't come under the context of this is a Christian victory, the second you remove the title, you now open it up for interpretation. And so the idea of being missional, but leaving your art up for interpretation, to me, those two don't go together. The missionary comes with certain strings attached, certain rules he plays by. When I use certain terms, I'm using them a certain way, and they're not free for everybody to grab them and use them a certain way. So when people say, like the question we got earlier, does the title matter? One of the reasons the title matters is because it tells people how to interpret your art. And it doesn't leave it up for them to say, well, this is my victory. I know what y'all say is victory for y'all, but this is victory for me.
It's good.
And not to mention that in scripture, when it talks about missions, when it talks about reaching the people, when it talks about getting people to believe, it's always the preaching of the gospel. You read it in the epistles. And Paul, in Ephesians, they came to believe because they heard the gospel and they believed. And so that's the problem when we hear people, I'm being a missionary, but we hear a missionary that's excluding the gospel. We don't see any mission at all.
Because you don't redeem cultures, you redeem people, and people produce redeemed culture. Mm-hmm. You don't go after a culture, redeem the culture's ways. You can redeem the ways and the people will still be unredeemed. Mm-hmm. You redeem the people, then the culture changes. And so if all you're doing is changing culture, you still aren't addressing people.
What lessons have you learned in your career that you think are important for the next generation of artists to know?
I think one of the key lessons is know what success is before you get going. Because if you don't, it's like the same fighting a war. You have to know what victory is. If you don't know what victory is, you'll be fighting forever.
Isn't that nearly impossible though?
What's that?
Knowing what success actually is,
I don't
because
think so. I don't think
you
so.
don't?
No. Just like we talked about definitions. So think about Bush going into Iraq. Think about any war. If you haven't determined before you go in, here's what victory is, then you can't go to Congress and say, hey, give us money to start this war, because their question is going to be, okay, when can we stop fighting? When we achieve this goal. You determine what victory is. If you don't do that, we're not giving you no money because we'll be there forever. I think the idea of determining what victory is, from very early on, you can settle in your heart. You can, in your heart, say, God, I don't know if it's appropriate to tell the story. I just told him last night, the art is truth, the truth. One of the first guys that we put out on Cross Movement Records outside of ourselves, I was reminding him, yesterday. I said, "Yo," because he believes he's getting back to some things now. If you listen to his latest album, he's getting back to some things. I said, I remember when we, first decided to put you on. We knew him for years before we put out an album of his. And me and Tonic was sitting on the steps of one of our building back in Philadelphia, and I told Truth this, so this ain't like no secret or nothing. We always knew you had the talent and the bright lights was going to come your way. We always knew it. But one of the things that always made us a little hesitant was it seemed like you had sort of like you wanted it just a little too much. And I remember me and Tonic was sitting outside with him, and Tonic just asked him, because Truth didn't know we were like looking to see whether we want to put him on. And Tonic said, "Yo, what's your definition of success?" Truth thought for a second, and he said, "My definition of success right now would just be to be in consistent ministry." And me and Tonic looked at each other and said, he's right. Because anything outside of that, if you're not going to be content until you have this, that, or the third, bright lights, cameras, action, all that, anything outside of that, you're going to be disappointed at some point. And we're not going to set you up for that kind of dejection and that kind of failure. But to be in consistent ministry, that's all you want? Bang. Contentment with godliness is great gain. And those kind of things. So I just say that to say, I think you can determine for yourself what you'll be content with and label like that's your success. Well, I'll be content if God allows this, if God does that. So my whole point is just for young artists, know what success is in God's eyes. And that may not look the same for everyone, but contentment with godliness is great gain. And if you're not going to be content until you has what Lecrae has or what, whoever, if you're not going to be content until you have that, you may be chasing after the wind like Ecclesiastes, as opposed to setting a goal that you believe is God honoring. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, determine success before you begin.
I think I can take that in God's economy as your second piece, because to leave it as determine what success is now before you get started still leaves that wide open when I'm listening, only because even part of what you said about Truth, he said my idea of success right now, that's optimal phrasing.
True.
Because it talks about a period and a time period.
True.
If you do add on there in God's eye what success is, I think then you've got it, it's solid. But just to determine success, that changes.
I think that was the given though. In God's.
We would hope, but yeah, to make it clear,
Yeah.
in God's economy, what success is. And like once again, that may not look the same for everyone, but I think contentment should look biblical. Contentment shouldn't look like until I have what they have, I'm not going to be content.
Since we started at a young age, and a lot of people do start at a young age, is to surround yourself with older men, older leaders that can pour into you. That's one thing that I would say is a lesson that I think we all learned, and that we needed somebody over us to guide us through some things. Specifically just practical things, not indeed practical things. The term struggling artist, right? Why does the artist have to struggle? Sometimes it's because of the nature of being an artist, but also it's sometimes just bad planning. Things like, how are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to take care of your family? How are you going to put away, for later stuff? And if you don't have somebody guiding you through those things, it can be a challenge later on, because rap is a young man's sport. You ain't going to do this forever, right? It's going to be a time when you're going to retire, you're going to stop. And if you haven't prepared for that time when you stop, it could be devastating financially and practically.